That would be a delight. Thank you, Andy. Confession, they say, is good for the soul. This is the first time I've actually done this myself. So in a former life, which ended in 1999 with my ordination, I used to work for the registration service, boo, hiss, where I trained and mentored registrars and superintendent registrars. Let me say right from the get-go that our parish administrators and our clergy in this diocese, as far as I can see, are really doing a pretty good job, if not an excellent job. Today, I'm not representing the registration service, which I'm sure they would be pleased to hear, but neither am I representing the diocese. I'm basically here for you and for anybody else that would like to ask questions. If I know the answers, I'll try to give them as clearly as possible. If I don't know the answers, perhaps if you'll permit me working through Andy, we can get that information to you a little bit further down the line. The joy and the despair of marriage registration is generally the fact that most clergy in the UK are taught how to organise, administer and register marriages by their training incumbents, which is brilliant as long as their training incumbent was taught by a training incumbent that knew what they were doing. And sometimes we don't, and that's not the fault of any person on this meeting today. If there's anything you don't know, it's probably because it wasn't put in earlier on in the process. I'm extremely grateful for parish administrators because over the last about 6 or 7 years, I'm finding that parish administrators are much more focused on this sort of stuff and tend to keep the clergy in line. So big shout to the parish administrators and a very warm welcome. Now, I just made a few preliminary notes and I'm just checking them. I've now conducted 14 weddings under the new system, and to be honest, I've convinced myself now that the system does actually work. I was personally quite anxious for the first few, and it was rolled out very, very quickly. And if you didn't catch the webinars from the General Registrar Office in the Church of England, it's not surprising that you might feel a bit unsupported in all this. So there are absolutely no silly questions, and you know, we will just work this through. So please, if there's something you don't know, you don't understand, particularly if you're worried about it, this is an opportunity, hopefully safely and calmly, to share that stuff. One little caveat before I begin. I've based most of what I'm saying today on the Essex registration service, which is fine if you're working in Essex. Is anybody here from one of the London boroughs? Could you just give a wave? Excellent, thank you. Oh, most of you, in fact. Thank you. Your own local registrar office will probably, I mean, the legal stuff, how to register, how to do marriage documents, that's all exactly the same. The only difference will be in how you get your information to your local registrar office and how they communicate with you. Generally speaking, I used to work in Redbridge and I found that very, very easy. It was easy to talk to the registration service there. But so for a few things, I'm going to give you some useful contacts, including someone called Terry Bell, who is right in the middle of the Chelmsford registration service. Technically speaking, she's a great person to phone if you're in the Essex part of the diocese. That said, having spoken to Terry at great length, met her a few times, I'm pretty sure if you were to phone her from outside of Essex, she'd be happy to talk to you because she's just that sort of person. And of course, we can all contact the wonderful Melanie Tucker at the Diocesan Registrars. So those are two good, solid, very helpful sources of information, plus your own surrogates. There we are. I think that's really all I wanted to say in terms of that. I was, Andy, might we have, first of all, I've sent Andy 4 documents. The first one is just a sort of useful list of contacts, because I think before we get into the meat of the registration practices themselves, I think most of us are actually quite concerned about how the stuff gets to and from the registration service. Oh, here we go. So if you haven't checked it out yet, or just didn't know about it, notes for the guidance of the clergy, bit of a typo there. The registration handbook is on that rather useful link. Now, if you click on that link, probably not now, you'll find that takes you to the new registration handbook. It was published in 2012. It was updated in July 2021. And I would imagine virtually every single question that you might have today, the answer will be somewhere in the 64 pages of that handbook.
And just to, so forgive me for interrupting, Peter, but just to say, all of the handouts that you'll be seeing on screen today will be on the diocesan website with the recording of this seminar. So you'll be able to, by the end of the week, you'll be able to find them very simply that way in future.
Thanks, Andy. That's very helpful. Yeah, it's I personally have copied the thing and just have it in a folder on my desk, and we have one in the parish office. That's sort of what it was. Guidebook for the clergy. You can go straight into it, flip up and down and find answers however you wish. But as I say, for me, I find it really handy to just print the thing off. And you may find, if you haven't looked at it yet, it's actually quite a liberating document. There's a postal address and correspondence address. Oh, sorry. All the details for Sayx House and for Terry Bell are there. So that's Essex Registration Service. But as I say, I suspect Terry won't mind you contacting her if you can't get through easily to your local registration service. Ordering a marriage certificate, there is the link into the Essex service. Now, I'm really sorry, I think each of the London boroughs will have its own link, and I haven't been able to go in and check. But basically, what we do is we let couples know that we will send off their marriage document very speedily. 7 days may elapse between it being received at the local registrar office and being put onto the national index. So allow 7 days, and then if you click onto that little link, you can order certificates for your marriage and pay for them online. So and that's what comes up, what those applying will see. So just that bit underneath, and you can just click on order and pay for your marriage certificate, and it happens. It's as easy as that. I think that's more or less all the information on that page, isn't it, Andy? Splendid. Thank you. One of the big concerns I know we all had at the beginning is what will happen if we send off a marriage document and it doesn't get there. Certainly the webinars that GRO and Church of England Central were doing, that was a big theme. The responsibility is on us to get it to the local registrar office, or the local registration service, I should say. Now, I was rather encouraged by the fact they've been doing it this way in Scotland since I think about 1930, and it's never gone wrong, we were assured. I'm not sure whether I should say this as we're being recorded, but having had a conversation with the Essex Registration Service, they have had one go missing, and they've had to process that. Now, there is a good way of mitigating against this, which is either by sending it by registered mail, so at least if it goes missing, you know it's gone safely. If you're in the London boroughs, you might be able to drop it through the letterbox of your registrar office, depending on what the arrangement is there. There is also a glorious thing the post office don't tell us about much, which is a certificate of posting. That costs 60p. So basically, if you take your letter into the post office, give them the cost of a first or second class stamp and ask for a certificate of posting, that comes up, has the postcode and the details of when it was sent. So you've got something you can then put on the file and say it went, it was safely done. Some people I know are trusting couples with their marriage document. I don't know about you, we've been using those rather nice little SPCK type A5 marriage congratulations cards. And so far we've had one left behind in church, one lost at a reception, and a request for a third from somebody else. So I'm not sure on the day happy couples are particularly good at looking after paperwork. So I might counsel against that. Does that make sense? Splendid. I'm very happy to take any questions on just that bit of process now, if it's helpful.
Can I ask, with the couple that I've had married recently, I actually had them sign 2 certificates. One to hold for me, just in case it did get lost, and one for the registrar, which I actually physically took. But is that illegal or is that okay?
Well, it doesn't count, is the simple answer. I asked that question, and basically, I mean, I do exactly that, if I'm honest. I've never yet been called upon, I've not yet been called upon to dig the spare one out. You would have to keep it very securely, as we do with everything else. And the opinion was that that practice could, technically speaking, be open to a degree of messing about with, i.e., in theory, somebody recording a marriage might be tempted just to produce one of those themselves. So if the likely answer would be, if you said, I've got a spare, I've made them sign the second one on the day, you might get the answer, well, I'm afraid we can't use that one.
Okay.
But as I say, if you know, it's not yet been a huge problem other than one that was mislaid, and it's reasonably easy to remedy. Does that help, Marion? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just thought it's a belt and braces. It was the first one, and I knew that we would have to take them to the registrars. That's what they were requesting up this end. But it's just, you know, and I've also got a receipt from the registrar. So once that was fine, I then destroyed the original. But you know, at the time, it was just like, well, let's just do something just in case. But thank you, Peter.
That's right. As I say, I have a nice little supply of them now in my filing cabinet, just in case. I'm just not sure how useful they would be, but it's reassuring to me to know they're there, frankly. I'm not missing registers. Are you missing registers? No. The notion of sitting there and copying up 2 registers and a certificate and then having to do a quarterly copy, I feel thoroughly liberated from that now, but it has taken a while to feel secure in it. Joel, hello.
Hi, thank you. So I feel like perhaps I've landed in here from the nursery, and I'm in a group of children who all know their letters and their colours. I'm completely at sea. Is there a sort of guidance as to, you know, where how the process works from when the couple contact me all the way through? Where can we locate that, just so that I know that I'm not breaking new rules? We do very few weddings here, so having a wedding anyway is a frightening prospect. But then being at risk of getting things wrong, I'm concerned. Is there a really idiot-proof guide that even I could follow? There
is. It's the guidebook for the clergy.
Right. Okay. So that's the link you told us. That's the place to start. Okay.
Yeah. I found that actually by sitting down with that, it took me about an hour, and I sat down and just sort of sat there with the marriage document and worked my way through it, and it does actually seem to have the answers to all the questions. but it has flowcharts, which are very good. I like the flowcharts, particularly some of the slightly more complicated issues, which don't come up very often, but it's quite nice to see in a flowchart where you go if they do. So there are flowcharts. There's a section at the beginning which, here we go. Roles and responsibilities, the marriage document, issuing the marriage document. It's all there, including the slightly scary things that come up incredibly rarely. Things like, one party resident in Scotland, or what happens if one of the parties to the marriage is serving on a warship. It's all in there, but also everything I would say you need is there. And if it isn't, there are people you can ask. I'd say, Terry, phone your surrogate, phone Melanie. No one is going to say you should know that. We can have a wander through in a minute through a marriage document. Yeah, how are we doing on time, Andy? Sorry, I've lost track.
We're doing incredibly well on time. It's 10:23, and we're already starting to take questions. So, do you want to take another 10 minutes or so, and then we'll pause again for questions through the chat? Is that?
We could do that. Or,
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So, sorry, Andy. I've just said we could do that, and then forgotten what you said. It's because it's being recorded. I'm absolutely because it's being recorded. I'm sorry.
Don't worry in the tiniest. If you're happy to sort of take another 10 minutes or so, and maybe, as you say, sort of talk us through the documents, then sure. Over to you.
Lovely. In which case, could we have the first of those marriage documents, which is the less complicated one, Abbott and Costello, I think. Oh yeah, there we go. Can you all see that? Splendid. Now, I've included my colleague Jane Yeadon here. She's from Upshire. So the first little box at the top, the reference number. Every church has its own reference number. C471 is Upshire. And the number after it is the number that you put the entry into in your not register. Does that make sense? The book we now have, or hopefully we all have, is the same, has the same status as a baptismal register, a burial register, or a confirmation register. It can be filled in sort of when you like. I tend to do it after I've sent off, or when I'm doing the marriage, sending off the marriage document. But you put the entry number in there. So each registration will have its own unique number, which will be your church number and then your register number. Now, marriage document issued by, that's the person who issues it. Sounds logical, but you might have a situation where it's a different person issuing it to the person who conducts the marriage ceremony. So the top one is whoever normally issues or would issue a marriage document in your organization. So they go in there. Doesn't really matter as long as they're qualified to do it. The date and place of marriage, in letters, the date, not numbers. So 1st November as opposed to 1st November. And it's helpful to put in the name of the church. Often in registers, we used to put in the parish church. That's a bit less helpful with these sort of documents. So whatever your church is called, in the case of St Thomas Upshire, St Thomas Church Upshire. There's all sorts of information on names and surnames. A very good way of making sure you get this right is to make sure you always ask the same question. So something along the lines of, will you tell me your full names and surname? And then you could, if you want to be really clever, follow it up by, and do you have or use any other names or surnames? And if they say yes to that one, there's a nice little section in the handbook which will help you to work out whether they're otherwise or formally known as, or whether you don't have to put it in at all. But other than that, name and surname, very simple. Date of birth, again, very simple. Condition, I love the way they kept it at condition. Now, we'll come on to that a bit in a minute. There are various options for this, but the main thing to remember is that we don't use bachelor and spinster anymore. There are still, I understand, a few folk who are, and that if you have been through any form of legal registration of a relationship, then you're probably not single. So if you have have been through a civil partnership previously, or a marriage, or you had a marriage which has then been annulled as opposed to dissolved, there are options there to put in. But basically, if you've not been through any form of marriage or civil partnership before, you're single. That's all there is to it. Are we all holding on so far? I know to a great extent.
I know Gemma has a question. So,
sorry.
Gemma, feel free to unmute and ask.
Go ahead.
No worries, thank you. So far so good. The only thing that has filled me with a certain amount of horror is the reference at the top. You mentioned that each church has a reference.
Yeah.
That has not been mentioned in any training that I've been to thus far. How do you know what your reference is?
Fear not, Gemma. Where are you?
Barking and Dagenham.
Barking and Dag. If you basically, do you remember when the registrars used to send us quarterly copy forms?
Yes.
To fill in.
Yeah.
Well, they always used to put the number on the form or on the envelope when you sent them back. But basically, that was for their filing purposes, and those filing purposes have been put into the system. So basically, all you need to do is to contact your local registration officer at Barking and Dag and say, can you give us, please, the reference number for our church?
Okay. Part of the reason I asked this is that I did a wedding in a church that wasn't my church.
Mm-hmm.
They had prepared the marriage document already, assured me they'd done everything that should be done, and then that caused a problem, unfortunately, when I took it there. And I didn't, as on their list of things that were missing, they did not mention that being one of them.
No,
and also when we used to get our quarterly returns, there wasn't a reference number. And when I asked them, I mean, they may well do this differently now, but when I asked them this previously, they said, oh, no, don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Just fill in the return and put your church on and all will be well. So I will do that. But I guess, is that more than perhaps down to individual registration districts rather than a legal thing? Because if it's a legal thing, that worries me more. If it depends on your registration district and how strict they are with their referencing system, then that's fine.
I think always ask yourself the question, is this likely to mean that the couple we've just married are not married?
Yeah, that's exactly what I have in mind.
Yeah, if the answer to that question is yes, and there are very few, really very, very few circumstances under which that would be the case, it's just simply a case of don't be anxious.
Okay.
What you could do very easily is to put in just your register entry number and send it off to them, and they'll put it in if needs be. They should have given it to you in the first place. So, really don't be anxious. The couple are perfectly married.
Okay.
It's all right. But that is always the anxiety, isn't it? The two anxieties are they going to be legally married? And if there's anything wrong, is anyone going to sue me, and is it going to cost me or my parish any money?
Yes.
Those are the two things that worry us, and I think it's appropriate they worry us, but part of hopefully today is to make you feel a bit calmer about that. Okay. Have I covered that, Gemma, or is there more you'd like to know?
No, that's fine. I will contact them and I'll ask them, but it's just good to know that if they are like they had been previously, oh no, don't worry about it, then that's not a problem, and I can just accept that and it will be fine.
I think Local register offices in London boroughs are rather like corner shops. If you've got a good one, they'll get anything for you, and it's quick and it's easy and it's fabulous. If you've got one that isn't part of a network, things don't occur to them, if that makes sense. So you may well find that actually Barking Dad get in touch with you in the fairly near future to say, oh, by the way, would you mind putting your number in? Yours is.
Yes.
Yeah. But of course, for them, they'll have to contact Z amount of churches, each of which will have a different number. Yes. So it may be that there's someone there, a bit like a cleric, who's saying, I'm not going to get too fussed about Palm Sunday yet. We haven't done Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, that's really helpful. Thank you.
It's okay. It's a pleasure.
Just to alleviate Gemma's fears, because the same thing happened with Havering Council. I only ever put reference 1 as it being my first wedding in this type of document. And I asked them to check it, and they never came back and said anything else other than that it was okay.
Yeah, it may be that what they're doing at that end is just putting them in themselves as they go along.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
It's perfectly possible. But I suspect what they'll do is bat it back to you fairly soon, because each time they do, they have to look it up, of course. So they'll save themselves time if they do as Essex have and send us all out our numbers. I think when we went and handed in the registers, I was given my number then, interestingly. Well, I was given 4 numbers because we have 4 churches and I forgot which one was which. But you won't get shot, it will be fine, and they'll still be married, is the simple answer. Occupations, I mean, you've done all this, you're used to this. Try not to use abbreviations, try not to use vague terms if you can avoid it. And if there is no occupation or somebody doesn't work, you are now obviously able to use things like homemaker, housewife, house husband, in theory. You are allowed to do a bigger sort of description of a job. In the old days when we were filling in registers, what you ideally wanted was a short occupation like omnibus driver or taxi driver or whatever. The last thing you wanted was a great big long sentence that you had to fill in the box and try to fit in and squeeze in the certificate. Now the boxes get bigger as you fill them in. It's not a problem at all. So you can be quite descriptive with occupations. The idea being that in 100 years' time, if someone's doing their family tree, they will know what sort of company their great-great-great-great-grandmother was a company director of. And try to avoid telecommunications, because that really does take a lot of space. But anyway, residence at time of marriage, that's exactly as it ever was. Now, one of the big things is obviously now is that we can, hurrah, finally put in details of mothers as well as fathers. Now, this has been a bit of there's been a bit of a slow take up on this. I asked Terry at Chelmsford to come up with a list of things that the registrars have noticed aren't happening. And one of the things they've observed is that they're getting quite a few marriage entries in still that don't have any details for mothers. Now, you don't have to have your mother's details in if you don't want to have them in, but it is an option you should be offered. And certainly if somebody wasn't asked or informed they could put mother's details in and came back later and said, when my sister got married, or my mother's details weren't in, why didn't they go in mine? Then that would require a correction. And I understand that corrections are now dealt with centrally by the registration service, not at local level at all. So GRO in Southport do it. And the cost for correction is £90. So I think I would feel slightly conscience stricken if a couple had to pay £90 to have stuff put in that I should have offered them. Does that make sense? I just think it's a wonderful thing that finally we've been wanting this to happen for such a long time. Deceased is never an occupation. In fact, neither is retired. It's sometimes difficult to get that information from parties. You know, okay, your father has retired, but what did he do before he retired? Retired is, if you don't put, yeah, retired isn't a thing in itself. And also step parents can now be added. So you can actually have up to 4 sets of parents on a document, 5 in fact in this case. So if we look at the left-hand column, Sidney Costello, the father, the birth father, has died. He was married to Daphne. It doesn't say he was married to, but let's just assume they were. Scaramanga, fabulous clergy person from the south of the diocese, who now remarried Francisco Scaramanga. Because the parents are married to one, or because the groom's stepfather is married to the groom's mother, then his details can go in if that is requested. And again, it's a sort of thing that we need to offer. How you phrase that question, I think, varies from person to person. With some people, it's very obvious where it's likely to take you. And sometimes you find that people just don't want step parents put in, or they don't want the natural parents put in, they just want the step parents in. It does happen. We just give them the choice, but all the information for how to process that is there, I promise you. Box 8. I
can ask a question at this point.
Please.
Yeah. I remember on the marriage certificates, if somebody didn't want a parent at all to record it, you used to have to put a dash in it.
Yep.
Do you do the same here, or do you just leave it blank?
I personally, I haven't had that opportunity yet, but I would put a dash in. I think, to be honest, there is nothing definite on that I've found. So it's you pays your money, you takes your choice. Generally speaking, a dash goes in a box where you haven't got an answer. So that works perfectly well. To put a dash, yeah.
Thank you.
That's okay. It's a pleasure. Now, if we're publishing bands, or if we're using a common license or an archbishop's license, then in box 8, it will always be married solemnized according to the rites and ceremonies of the Church of England, and then it would be by bands or after bands by me, as it would have been in the registers in the old days, by license by me, by archbishop's license by me, or by schedule. And schedule is basically what used to be the old superintendent registrar's certificate. So if you are unable to publish banns for a couple, but they are legally entitled to be married in the church, then you send them off to the register office, and the register office create a schedule for them, which you use instead of the marriage document. They basically, the couple will bring it along, or it will be posted to you. I've done 2 of these. It's normally where one or both of the parties is a foreign national. And basically that's a joy, because the schedule just arrives, and all you have to do effectively is check the details right and get the couple to sign it. But if you're using a schedule, then it's by schedule by me. Now, there are 2 things to bear in mind with schedules. One is they have on the back all sorts of instructions as to how to use them, which I would urge you to solemnly ignore, because 95% of schedules are for non-Church of England churches. And the marriage ceremony is slightly different. The vows are different. So it will say on the back, the parties have to say the following. And that's only basically because these things normally go out to Methodist churches, Gurdwara, Roman Catholic churches, whatever. So we used just ignore the back. Does that make sense with the schedule? The other thing is the schedule is valid for a year. So it's not like bands. If you've got a couple that are having to move around the globe a bit, they can easily go and give their notice, and you can get the schedule 9 months before the wedding. There's really not a problem with that. We still have to stick to 3 months, but for everything else, it's a year. Let's just have a quick look at signatures, and then we've probably covered this chunk. It's as it always used to be, the usual signature of the person. So it's how they would normally sign. We used to say how you sign a check. No one remembers that now, but that is the principle. It's just your signature. Now, if you can't read the signature, you can, well, I would ask them what they've written, and then just write it in pencil on the back of the form, back of the schedule or marriage document, so that when it gets to the registrars, they will know, they can type in what the bridegroom or the bride actually wrote. Does that make sense? We used to do it with registers. We used to write it on the inside margin sometimes. The same with witnesses, but with a witness, they sign and they write their name underneath. Now, that's absolutely fine if you've only got 2 witnesses and they don't write too big. I have a wedding coming up on Saturday with 4 witnesses, and I'm still not sure how I'm going to get all that into the boxes. I think pencil lines and stern words will probably achieve it. And again, if yes, bottom box, this is the key thing, because people have been saying, what happens if the person that issues the document isn't the person that conducts the marriage ceremony? And there it is on the bottom. This wedding was conducted by the groom's mother as officiating minister. You would put in your designation, but it really doesn't matter whether you were the person that issued the marriage document. Your responsibility as the one who conducted the marriage is to sign at the bottom, and indeed to make sure that that document gets to the registration service to be entered onto the system. But you don't have to be the person that issued the certificate and the person that conducts the ceremony. Does that make sense? I'm hoping. Lovely. I think I've now gone well over the 20 minutes, Andy.
It's all good. Okay, so what we're going to do now is take some questions, but this time through the chat. So we've already got a couple, which I'll read out. Do add any others to the chat at this time. Then we'll take a short break, and then we'll ask some questions by unmuting and having real people asking them. But some questions through the chat. So Peter, first of all, there's a couple of questions about foreign nationals. Somebody writes that they've got a Hungarian gentleman who's been in the UK since 2008, but has leave to remain. He's got a number. Where does this priest stand? Can she do the banns? And then we got a similar question, which is simply, when would a foreign national need a certificate?
Would you like me to answer those now, or would you like me to answer them when after the breakout? I don't mind either way.
If you could answer them now, that'd be brilliant. And
okay, it's all to do with well, it's all to do with Brexit, actually, and the registration service and the Church of England being very concerned about sham marriages, and it just keeps tightening everything up and up and up. The simple answer is look it up or ask, and I'm just about to look it up. But generally speaking, if a person has leave to remain, that may not necessarily be enough for bans. Actually, I think I would like to double check this. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Can I hop out for a moment? So I'll give you absolutely the right answer.
Peter, can I clarify that one, please?
Yes, do.
He was 8 years old when he arrived here, and he also has a number. There is a number that he had to is to give me, which he has done. It's that number that I believe allows me to
it does.
Yeah.
That's what I was just checking.
Yeah. So basically, does he hold a British passport or does he hold a Hungarian passport?
He holds a Hungarian passport.
Okay. And the number he's given you, is that to do with his immigration status? Is he applying for citizenship or naturalization?
No, I don't think so. I think he already has that. I think that's what the number means. Okay. Unfortunately, the marriage documents are at church and I can't look at what he's filled in for me. So this is by memory. But somebody told me I needed a number. And I said, have you got this particular number? And he said, oh, yes. And then produced the number as well.
Okay.
Shall we take our break now? And then we'll be back in 10 minutes of comfort break, and we'll continue with all of your questions, including the ones about foreign nationals.
So the question, the first question, I think is actually relating to EU settlements, the EU settlement scheme, as it's always referred to, EUSS. Now, basically, if someone is applying, is a European national who is applying for legal right to settle in the UK, then they will have a number. And basically what you do is you take that number and you go to your registration handbook, where you'll find a useful, the link to go to, so that you can then, at the Home Office, I think, HM Passport Office, and you basically put the code in. That will tell you whether the application is valid and where it's got to. Now, the other way of doing that, of course, is to do it by schedule, if everything else failed. So basically, if you've got one of those numbers, then you just, page 60, Appendix X of the handbook, and there's a step-by-step guide for checking EU settle status. I knew it was there. It's generally speaking, if the parties don't both have British or Irish nationality, it's probably going to be a schedule or a license, but probably a schedule. In fact, very probably a schedule. Does that help?
I think that's really good. So we got a question from a curate who is asking the question, when would somebody conducting a service not be the person issuing the certificate?
Basically, it could easily be a case that someone has a friend or relative who is coming to conduct the wedding. That happens every so often. Obviously, with that, if they're coming from another diocese, you have to get the diocesan clearance for it. But simply where we are, there are 4 clergy within the benefice, and generally speaking, I tend to sign off on these things in the parish office because I'm just there quite often and it's in front of me. That doesn't mean because I'm in the top box that I have to conduct the wedding. It's generally if you've got a visiting member of the clergy who's a friend or family member, or it's another member of your own team quite often. If you're lucky enough to have a team, I concede.
Yep. Okay. So a question from somebody who is new to the diocese. Welcome. And in a deanery meeting, he was told that banns couldn't be used after divorce, or if one person were not baptized, and there need to be a common license instead. This was not the case, he says, and I'm not surprised at all, in his previous diocese. Is this a Chelmsford Diocese stroke bishop decision or a misunderstanding in the deanery meeting?
I think if we go back to training incumbents, training incumbents, I think back in about 1952, there was an Amendment Act in 1952, and prior to that, that would have been absolutely correct. but then you couldn't marry divorced people in churches anyway then. No, banns are wholly appropriate to be used after divorce or the dissolution of a civil partnership. And you do not have to be baptized. Neither party has to be baptized in order to be married in the Church of England. If a license is involved, a common license, then the surrogate will ask the parties to write something on the form by which the attestation is made that says, though not baptized, I support the aims and objectives of the Church of England, or I wish to be married in the Church of England in this way. But you wouldn't see that bit, you just get the license. So no, it was true once, a very, very long time ago, but isn't anymore.
And also because it happened, if there were ever a church that demanded, if you want to get married in this church, you have to do alpha. That is absolutely inappropriate and illegal. Don't do it. Bishops don't like it when you do it. They come and visit and they have harsh words with you, and they're right.
Yeah, I've always worked on the assumption we make as few hoops and obstacles as possible, but yeah, you can suggest, you know, if you do a marriage preparation course and you have confidence in the product, you can suggest to people they might like to come and enjoy doing that. That's absolutely brilliant. But what you can't do is say, well, you have to do an alpha course, or we expect you to worship every week for 2 years and join the PCC, and your giving has to be over £100 a week. That sort of thing. That all doesn't work. Thankfully, as you say, Andy.
Quite. So our next question is about foreign nationals again, but this time about somebody from the USA. What's the process in that case, and the bans appropriate there?
Well, unfortunately, nowadays, someone from the United States of America is a foreign national. So that's straight off for a schedule. That's as easy as that. All our foreign Commonwealth countries are now aliens for the purposes of the Registration Act, which is rather unfortunate. But yeah, if they're foreign, if they don't have a British or Irish passport, generally speaking, that's going to be a schedule.
The next question, as I understand it, is about your process. Would you tend the first time that you meet with a couple to get all their details for the marriage document, or would you tend to ask them for maybe their ID, to do the ID check first time, and then the details the next time you meet them? How do you tend to do that?
Okay. Well, I'll obviously it varies from place to place. It depends on the sort of the people you have available to do it. But I'll happily take you through our system. Assuming it begins with a phone call or an email or something, we'd like to get married. Once we've sort of had conversations about dates and times and things like that on the phone or by email, we then bring in, we ask the bride and groom to come in, and we bring them into the parish office. And there are two reasons for this. One is doing this sort of stuff in the middle of the night in your study isn't always helpful, nor particularly secure. But we have things like, you know, a colour photocopier, lots of space, and we will make them an appointment which will last about 45 minutes. And at that point, we ask them to bring in all their documents. We ask them to bring in a deposit. Now, we have no legal right to ask for a deposit. We do, just to sort of clarify, you know, set things a bit. At that point, we would hope to see all the documents that we need. We have a sort of tick list. I'm sure most of you do something along these lines to check the ones you've had and the ones you haven't had, so you can chase them up later. Now, at that point, what I would do is go through a paper marriage schedule just with a biro, to get down, first of all, what needs to go onto the marriage document, and to flag up to them, you know, and you can have this now. start that thing. So you've got something that you can then start to amend as time goes on. Now, there is a glorious system that you can sign up to. I've forgotten the name of it already, where the marriage documents are, where you can put in all sorts of details and bits and pieces and pull it all down from a website. We don't do that because our system works, but the system, the name of which I can't remember, is quite good. People I know who use it, because you can put in tons.
Is that the life event system?
That's the life event system. Yeah, I'm told it's very good, but we have sort of systems in place that it'd be more complicated to go onto the life event system than carry on doing what we're doing. Joel, and then were you scratching your head, Gail? Were you waving? Joel.
So I put in a question about that because in the break I started to look at the clergy handbook, or the guidance you suggested, and I'm at such a level I need to know where to get hold of the marriage document.
Right.
I'm that far back, and it's not just floating around on the internet, is it? You've got to have access to it. So how do you, if you're not on live events, how do you access the document?
Would you like me to email you one?
Yes, please. Okay, thank you.
Actually, Andy, as you've got 2 marriage documents there, they're completely fictitious, but if you'd be so kind as to email one of those to Joel, then all you have to do, Joel, is just amend it each time, save it and amend it.
Right.
I will gladly do that as an attachment to Joel, but also for everyone else, they will be on the website at the same place as the recording of this session.
There you go. But yeah, the ones I've gone through are completely fictitious, thankfully. Shame, really.
For the people involved.
There are lots of examples actually in the back of the handbook as well, but I know I keep banging on about it, but it's so easy to use, and it certainly gives me a sense of security.
So just one more question before we move to look at another example of a marriage document. And this question is about common license. And the question is, so if a couple are being married by common license, so just checking they don't need to go to the parish they live in to have banns read, but do they need to tell the parish that they live in that they're getting married in another parish?
They don't. They don't. As long as they have a qualification to marry in the other parish, no, they don't have to notify their own parish at all. It's simply you make the arrangements with the parish you're being married at. They will give you a letter. This is what we should be doing as incumbents. I don't think, annoyingly, parish administrators can do. I think it has to be a clerical letter, which just basically says, for the surrogate, would you please, I've arranged for this marriage to take place on this date with these people, would you please sort out a license for them? And then the registry normally will post it straight to the parish office or the member of clergy officiating at the ceremony. It's quite straightforward. Oh, here we are. Marks and Spencer. This was probably the one I was going to do first. Yeah, if you could go up a little bit more, Andy, thank you. You just move it a little higher up the screen. I think we've, oh no, let's begin where yeah, okay. Again, this is just, it's ever so straightforward. I don't think there's a need to go through this one. I think we've covered it.
Excellent. Do you want to mention about witnesses? Is there a minimum and a maximum number of witnesses?
The maximum number is 4, and that's quite scary. Sometimes people ask what qualifies a person to be a witness, and we used to say sane, sober, and preferably English speaking. Now that kind of works for most things in Church of England liturgy, unfortunately, but there is no minimum age for a witness. They do have to understand what's going on, and that really is a decision that I wouldn't want to make as a person conducting the marriage. So if the parties say, I want my 6-year-old daughter to be a witness, that is absolutely fine. But you need to mention to the couple, if they were ever required to give evidence that they were at the service, if that's something you want to put on them. I would also suggest, if you've got very young witnesses, that you have a couple of adults in there as well. Right. Oh, should the marriage document be typed or can it be handwritten? Either, really doesn't matter. The advantage of typing them is that the registrars can read your handwriting. I was a registrar and a superintendent registrar, and I got foul handwriting. They always think we got copper plate, but no, I find them easier to do by typing, but no, just as good, just write them out.
So talking of being a registrar, I've been asked a question from somebody not on this call, self-supporting priest who is wondering about taking a job in a registrar department. Are there any obstacles to this?
I suspect there are. I'll go into personal opinion mode again now. In fact, I'll go into anecdote mode. It was made very clear to me that I couldn't be a registration officer and a member of the clergy when I began my pre-ordination training. And this is basically for two reasons. One is that registration staff have access to church registers. So, we deposited them at the register office. So in theory, nefarious things could be done by a registration officer who was both poacher and gamekeeper. The other one is that civil law is such that there's a clear distinction between a religious marriage and a civil marriage, and the same with civil partnerships. And so what you don't want is a situation where there's somebody conducting a marriage at the front of a register office and somebody says, oh, it's Miss So-and-so, our curate or our Sunday school teacher, because suddenly the thing becomes there's a religious reference to it. It all starts to get a bit twitchy. I don't know whether the law has changed since 1999. In some ways, I would rather hope it has, but I suspect it's unlikely.
Thank you. You've also provided a list of some errors and misunderstandings.
Yeah, these were generally generated by the glorious registration service in Chelmsford. I just said, are there things you've noticed that have been coming in? And an hour later, all the registrars talk to each other. They're very, very organised about this. Some of them, I must admit, they're still hanging around from when I used to be in registration. Things that changed long ago that some of us are still using. We talked about exclusion of mothers and or stepmothers' details, and there's a nice little guidebook page and paragraph reference there for you. Batch from the spinster, again, we don't use them, and I don't think they're actually common tender anymore. It's the sort of thing will probably get you a stiff letter now. Divorced, we really don't use, and it shouldn't be used. It has no place. If you go back to about the 1950s, again, 52, 53, up until that point, if a party was divorced, their condition used to say either formerly the wife of so-and-so from whom he obtained a divorce, or the divorced wife of so-and-so. And so when that was got rid of, because that was awful, that was, you know, if it was if the divorce was considered to be caused by you, then you were the divorced wife of, and if you were the innocent party, then it was formerly married to from whom they obtained a divorce. So divorce has always been a really no word in registration. You could, in theory, get a situation where somebody, if you did put divorced in the register, you could get a couple that said, well, we didn't, you know, we don't look at it in that way. We say that we finished our relationship, or we liberated each other into freedom or whatever. And they could actually say, I want that word taken out, which again is a correction fee. So if you hear anybody saying that they're doing it, or you see it, do slap down on it. So previous marriage dissolved, previous civil partnership dissolved, previous marriage annulled. The interesting one, the one I didn't know, in the case of the death of a formal civil partner, then the term is surviving civil partner. So if you have a couple coming to you for marriage where one party was previously in a civil partnership and their partner died, they are not widow or widower, they're certainly not single, they are surviving civil partner. And we actually had one here, not with a surviving civil partner, but we've actually now done a wedding where one party to the marriage had previously contracted a civil partnership which had been dissolved. So it does happen. I think we talked about death and retirement as not being occupations at great length. Date and place of marriage, yes. After banns, before banns, license, yes. Do you want to talk about otherwise and formally known as? Because I know this worries people. If somebody presents themselves to you and they have clashing documentation, so for example, they have a birth certificate with one name on it or a different spelling of a name on it to their passport, it's handy to reconcile those two things together. So if a person is using two names concurrently, so for example, you might find it would usually be a woman who has been divorced, but she's still sometimes using her previous married name and sometimes using her maiden name. It would be handy to say Patricia Smith, otherwise Patricia Jones, because then all her documents tie together with the new marriage entry. Now she could say, I absolutely don't want that to happen, in which case just make a note in your own notes, declined to have the otherwise shown. A formerly known as is slightly rarer, but it's where you have a name that someone used to use, really doesn't use anymore at all, but might still have a few insurance documents or something in the old name. So just by putting it in, that may well save them problems later on down the line. But with both of those, and otherwise or a formally known as, if the parties to the marriage don't want it, then you don't have to put it in. Double. Is it okay if I pick up on this, because I like that? If they want to go double barreled, it depends on whether they want to do it in a documented form or not. If both parties want to become Smith Jones, I can say this because I'm a Smith, then they could do it either just by usage and produce their marriage certificate and say, well, after that date, I started using both names. To do it more tidily, a deed poll or change of name deed would be better from a legal perspective. To do it really tidily, if one of the parties changes their name by deed poll before the marriage, then the other party marries into that new double-barreled surname. Does that make sense? And that one thing people often don't know about is that you can take either surname after a marriage if you wish. So brides traditionally take the surnames of their husbands, but it could be done the other way round. I have a parishioner that they actually did that. so the husband actually took on the bride's surname. So you can do it either way, really, but you can do it by usage, and that's absolutely fine legally. But if you want belt and braces, the really the best way to do it is a change of name deed and then marry into that name.
But we can't do that for them by what we
can't.
put on the marriage certificate is the key, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, we record what the situation was at that moment in time, not what they do afterwards. That's a key thing, actually. Yes, that's very important. Thank you, Andy. Where are we? Oh, yes, our corrections. They were the bane of our lives, were they not? They were. We hated them. It's so much easier now. Yay. Now, forget numbered errors. Because we don't have registers with lots of pages, we don't have to number the errors anymore. So if there's a mistake or even 2 or 3 mistakes in the marriage document, all you do is cross through the mistake, ask the right above or as near to the crossing out what the correct word is, and then just ask both parties, the bride and the groom, just to put their initials next to the correction. That's all you have to do. You don't have to sign anything. You don't have to do marginal notes. You don't have to go all the way back to see where the last error was. It's as simple as that. Very, very easy. And it's worth stressing to people before they sign the document in the way that hopefully you would have done with marriage registers. You know, please check this very, very thoroughly, because it'll be difficult and possibly costly to change it later. And if you know that you say that every time, then you can be reasonably confident if it is ever questioned. You can say, well, actually, I always say this at that point. Oh, yeah, little known stuff, but sometimes useful. You still get people, sometimes in the traveller community, who will make a mark rather than sign. And if that's the case, you just write underneath the mark of and their full names. More frequent is when you might get someone who signs in Chinese characters, in which case you just write underneath the signature of, and you're covered. And as I say, something to make the registrar's work a little easier, pencil notes on the back. They don't mind pencil notes on the back, particularly when it's signatures. In fact, they'll be very grateful to you. Oh yes, officiating minister. Let me just check. Yeah, if someone is coming from another parish to conduct a wedding, then rather than just putting officiating minister, they would add, curate of St. John's, Leicester, or whatever. Yeah, it just gives you a bit more recognition, really. That's it for that bit.
Thank you. So we've had a question on the chat about somebody who doesn't have birth certificate and passport. Now, clearly, that's going to make the ID checks difficult. What should a member of clergy do in that case?
I'm afraid it's a bit sort of being cruel to be kind. The parties have a legal right. The parties have a legal obligation to provide you with proof of identity, and they're generally speaking that will be a passport. Photo ID is the best form of ID, obviously. A driver's license could be used in conjunction with a birth certificate. But generally speaking, if somebody doesn't have a passport, there is in the guidance, there is actually another flow chart with what happens if you haven't got. It does make life quite a bit more complicated, and nowadays most people, if they haven't got, thinking about it, it's perfectly reasonable not to have a passport. if they haven't got a birth certificate, sadly, they'll have to get one. It's as simple as that. With any documentation, the onus is upon them to provide it. If they can't provide it, then unfortunately we can't progress any further.
Sorry, can I? So I'm scanning through the guidebook for the clergy. It says on page 12 they've got evidence of current use of names, so things like utility bill and council tax bill. Yep. Those don't count because they've not got a photo to prove that it's that person, I presume. Well, I'm not quite sure.
These things prove that they use the name, but they don't prove that they are who they say they are.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So it does have to be some sort of a photo ID. Yeah. Which is a passport or
a new driver's license.
A license.
It's not. I mean, you can still do it in the old-fashioned way with birth certificates and marriage certificates and things. But yeah, the evidence of current use of name still doesn't give you their identity. It just says this is a name I use. I would be inclined, if you get a situation where somebody says I have absolutely no proof of ID, that you have a quick word with either the registration service or with Melanie.
Yeah.
That is one I wouldn't want to call personally.
Sure. Thank you.
And then whenever you take advice, just write on the back, spoke to, and the date and what they said.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left in this session. Thank you for sticking around. So this is literally your chance to ask anything that hasn't been asked before. And this time you can do so if you wish through the chat, or you can just unmute and ask a question, but then you'll be on screen for the future.
Can I just say, Joel, I appreciate you're in a particularly difficult position because you haven't done any of this. So if it would help, if you find yourself near Waltham Abbey or I find myself near you, I'll quite happily sit down with all the stuff for an hour or so and work through it, if that will be useful.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'll chase up with Melanie about this ID issue first. Thank you. Yeah.
Peter, could I just good to see you after all these years. Thank you. I've been, as you know, I've been a vicar for 25 years and I was surrogate in my last parishes, but I've been retired 2 years. And now they've asked, would I start to do some weddings next year? And this has been such a good refresher course and really helpful because there were lots of things there I was thinking it's changed such a lot since I was doing it. And it's made me now want to go away and look at it a bit more.
Oh, bless you, Gay.
Good to see you.
Neither of us looking any older, I have to say.
No.
Remarkable,
really
isn't it?
Good. Yeah, really good.
God is good.
Yes, very.
Any other questions?
Sarah, was this useful for you as an administrator?
Yeah, I think that was to you.
I think you're muted, Sarah. Sorry.
Sorry, what was it to me? You were saying?
No, I was just asking Sarah because
yes, Sarah,
I'm very conscious the parish administrators are the stars of the show nowadays.
Sorry, I do apologise. I was kind of half reading through my notes there that I'd taken, so if there's anything I needed to ask a question on. That's been really, really helpful. I do a lot of the paperwork when somebody rings up for a wedding, so I send out a wedding pack and a banns form straight away, and then everything comes back and it goes straight to the vicar. So actually it's been quite useful for me to see what he does the next time, and at least I can help him and push him in the right direction, as he had a few questions as well. So it's been really helpful. Thank you.
That's a pleasure. One of the things we're hoping to get together in our MMU here is to get the parish administrators together to actually spend a day of being, well, very much affirmed by the rest of us, but also an opportunity for them to actually get together and say, the clergy, they drive us mad, and help to, form a collegiality. As you are the stars of the show, really.
That's very kind, thank you.
That's one question on administration side of that. As I haven't had fees lists or anything for the last couple of years, and I've said that when I start doing these weddings, can I do my own preparation? Do I take it now that I can just look up, find a chart somewhere, and it's just going to be sections like the bands, and that's all just missing, so the cost will be just the same as normal, just going across?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Gay. Could you rephrase it? Sorry.
On the fees table,
yep,
that we used to have, which I haven't seen, so I don't know if it's changed. It used to be, there was a marriage service charge, and then there was a band, I'm going from memory, remember?
Yeah.
And the band's charge.
And the certificate charge,
yeah.
if the band.
So obviously the bands have gone, the certificate charge must have gone. Is it just going to be a marriage service, or is there any additional charges?
Oh no, we're still, if we publish bands, we're still obviously the band fee and the certificate fee. If it's a schedule, then it will be unkind to.
Exactly.
You want to take the bands out of the package if you have an inclusive price, as it were.
Yeah.
That's
straightforward as that.
Yeah, it really is as straightforward as that.
Thank you.
And I think you'll find the table of fees either, I think it should be on the diocesan website, but if not, it will certainly be on the Central Church of England website. So that's the way to do it. They don't send it out on paper any longer for very good financial and ecological reasons.
Yeah, ironically, when the Archdeacon's visitations are done, you have to have one in the porch of your church or on the notice board of your church. So it's just the diocese is being stingy because we still have to print them out at our end.
Good point.
That's the administrator's job here.
I just realised that was recorded, wasn't it? Oh no. I'm probably done. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to finish, if I may, with one of the readings set in the lectionary for today, which is Psalm number 1. And then a prayer. I'll say thank you now to Peter for his time, and thank you to all those that are on the call, and thank you again for you for watching it. If in some future day you choose to summon this up. Happy indeed are those who do not follow the counsel of the wicked, or linger in the way of sinners, or sit in the company of scorners, but who delight in the law of the Lord, and ponder the Lord's law day and night. They are like a tree that is planted beside flowing waters, that yields its fruit in due season, whose leaves shall never fade. What they do will prosper. Not so the wicked, not so. They are like winnowed chaff that shall be driven away by the wind. For the Lord guards over the way of the just, but the way of the wicked leads to doom. Lord God, make us, each of us in our different roles, like trees beside flowing water. When we are weary and dry, please give us the sap that will give us life to the full. As we go on to administer or preside marriages, please give us the sense of responsibility that will keep us within the rules, and the sense of love and warmth that will make us exactly the right person for this particular couple as they prepare for their marriage and as they celebrate it together. We offer ourselves into the hands of God and we trust him. Amen.